Welcome back, everybody. This is the design track. If you're not supposed to be here, you're not allowed to leave because the doors are shut, and we're staying here now for the rest of the afternoon. My name is Jo. I'm from The Moment. We're part of the Creative Engagement Group, and we are super proud to be sponsoring the design track today for FutureSync. First up this afternoon is Chloe, who's going to tell us the benefits and the advantages of a content-driven design approach. Over to Chloe. Big clap. Good afternoon.
Hiya. So can you all hear me all right? Yeah. Okay, good. So before I introduce myself and get on with it, I know they call this the graveyard slot, so I've got a little warm-up for everyone to do. So here you can see a series of pictures. What I'd like you to do is turn to the person next to you and tell them how any of the pictures that you choose represent what you're hoping to get out of this afternoon. So I'm going to time you guys. You've got 30 seconds each. You need to switch, and you are starting now. Yeah, it's all about being figurative, this activity. So I might say that the snake is my aim because I'm going to move stealthily through this presentation and not worry about coming up against obstacles and things like that. So hopefully now you guys are all awake. We'll get on with it. So who am I, and who am I to be talking about content-driven design? Well, my name is Chloe. I'm a UX designer at IBM. I've quite recently graduated in product design, so my world has typically been very 3D model making, beautiful artifacts as communication. So communicating ideas through models, drawings, maths even. But in the rush to kind of push these new methods of communication, we often kind of left words by the wayside. So then when I came to IBM as a user experience designer, I was really challenged because it's really very, very complex things that I'm trying to understand, and sometimes you couldn't even draw the kind of concepts that we were working with. So this was a to-do list of all of the things that my team intended to learn about in a week. So you can see, things like Docker containers, Kubernetes. We're people with no technical background, but we kind of work with all of this every day. But also you've got to bear in mind that our users are kind of comfortable with things like command line all the time, and often they're really skeptical of UI, which is kind of our core reason to be. So not only have we got to cope with these things, we've also got to sound knowledgeable enough that they trust us. So the most common thread for me has been, while you can rely on whiteboarding, post-it notes, drawing to help you out, the stuff that we've been most proud of as a design team has been our writing work. And that's what I'm here to tell you about today. So if this is an argument, what are we arguing against? Well, I don't know if you guys find this, but at IBM we are always fighting the waterfall. And waterfall is where product ownership turns over to design and goes, okay, go make this. Design turns over some wireframes to development, development make it, and then all of a sudden someone in content is sitting there with this site on their shoulders to fill, and they have nothing ready for it or anything that could even fit the spaces that we've given them. So that's the fight. And unpacking that a little bit, there are at least 3 really big problems. One of which is that certainly at IBM, we are very short on content writers. Second, now that we're all working in an agile way, we need to be working in parallel from the beginning to the end of the process. And also with new practices like design sprints, we need our kind of early prototypes to be more and more user-friendly. We can't just show them an empty wireframe, it means nothing. So I think a pertinent example of this for me was when I decided to try and host my portfolio on WordPress. I'm sure a bunch of you will recognize this screenshot of their UI. And what was really bothering me here was that these categories on the left, user experience design, visual design, all things I want to include, couldn't be a page as well as a heading in the menus. And it's just an example for me of how that's great user-centered design because they've thought about the fact that there are 2 different items you want to think about, but they've kind of missed out on the fact that I've got content to go in both spaces. So it's not necessarily that content-driven isn't a user-centered way to design. It's about all of the waterfall and other issues that user-centered design's picked up. So I thought I'd jump into an example first. This is taken from my internship back in 2016. We were a group of 14 very junior designers, and we were challenged with creating in 1 week a home for the voice of designers at IBM. And we got to doing some design thinking. You know, we empathy mapped designers that we thought might be isolated, that might feel left out of the community. And the questions we came up with immediately were, well, how do they get to the content? It could be anywhere. And how could we make a Twitter feed look sensible next to a full-length Medium article? You know, it's a big variety in content style. So what we did was spend 5 days basically reskinning Facebook with IBM. It was only when we then started collecting example content to go into this reskinned Facebook that we realised quite how bad some of it was. So if you type in hashtag IBM design into something like Instagram, you get these random, badly formatted images that are kind of auto-posted and stuff. So it was kind of scary because we realised we were going to have to start mandating how people posted to their own personal social media, which is like a big no-no, really, isn't it? A light bulb moment happened in a restaurant when some of us were chatting about Humans of New York. Give me a whoop if you've come across this. Yeah, cool. So I think it's a fantastic platform. I've always really enjoyed reading them, even if they're a bit sad, the stories. But we realised that these posts were particularly captivating, and were curious about what it was behind that kind of made them so great. So then we realised our real challenge was not actually making all formats work for designers at IBM, but for making sure that we chose the right format to connect us. So what we've been doing was just connecting like IBM random stuff on the internet. And our next step was to look at what type of post made us feel good, enlightened, proud of where we worked. And that consistently turned out to be Medium articles because they kind of are often illustrated really nicely and they have a good kind of meaty amount of content to read. And I think that aligned really well with Humans of New York posts because you have these striking photos as well. So in the end of week presentation, as you've probably all guessed, our integrated IBM Facebook was a disaster. Stakeholders hated it. But what they did like was the guidelines that we wrote for trying to get people to write Medium articles that made sense. And 3 years later, this iteration of those guidelines are still being used by a huge number of IBMers. And you can all go online to Medium and read our Design at IBM publication, which is something I really enjoy reading and hopefully you'll enjoy. The best bit is the number of writers. This should scroll. It goes a long way in 3 years. So that's really cool. So that's one example. But you're probably all asking, what does content-driven design actually stand for? So the way that I like to think about this is using a thing called OSCAR. So we've got outcome, scale, know-how, affirm, and review. So I'm going to talk through each one just a little bit. If we begin with outcome, we stop ourselves getting to work before we've actually challenged our assumptions. This is a great way of figuring out exactly what the user outcome is. So if we carry on with the example of designing your portfolio, we might think that the desired outcome is for the user to be impressed by your flashy visuals. But when we check ourselves, we realise that actually they're coming onto your website to figure out how much experience you've got, and that is drastically going to change what you make. Then we think about scale. This is the scale of outcomes. So if the user's overall aim is to understand how much experience you have, then showing them 1 or 2 projects is not going to cut it. You know, whereas if you show them a kind of short list of everything you've done, you could like push them all the way to the end of their journey quite quickly. And you can number this. So if the outcome is at 10, you can kind of decide how far between 1 and 10 they are. Then know-how. So OSCAR is actually designed as a coaching tool where know-how is like about the work that the coachee needs to go away and do to get to their goal. As a designer, the know-how is like the hard facts that the user needs to acquire to feel that they've reached their goal. So if we follow the portfolio example again, then we're thinking an idea of how many projects you've done, a date range of your portfolio work, an assessment of the breadth of your expertise, and the ability to see you improving from your early work to your current work. So this is your content guidelines. So you go away, you collect all of this work for your portfolio, and you're kind of ready to get on with making it. So to affirm our progress, we acknowledge that the user is part way to completing a task, And this is something that can be applied anywhere. So for example, it might be a line underneath the list of your portfolio projects that says, oh great, now you've seen my work, why don't you contact me by email here? And our numbers from the scale stage can help us here, because it's all about being transparent and affirming with the user. If there are another 10 clicks, unfortunately, before they reach their goal, then you need to say, okay, yeah, this is the right place, you are getting there, stick with it and keep going. And that can really encourage people to stay with your experience rather than kind of giving up and going home. And finally, most importantly, with anything content, we review, because it's not like you can be a couple of pixels out and it's not a problem. If you get spelling mistakes wrong or commas in the wrong place, you can actually really offend people. So I'm sure we've all seen awful things like that. So this is a model that I try and kind of use from anywhere from a whole website, like my first example, all the way through to just writing 1 or 2 lines of copy. So we'll look at an example a bit more like that now. So this second example is how we came to write the empty state text on a project called Agile Service Manager. It's a tool which visualizes topology or like a network map of IT assets, basically, and the user is an IT operator. So what they're looking to do is find the node that they've heard has a problem and look at the surrounding nodes around it to figure out where exactly that problem is beginning. Now, we needed to write something short and sweet to prompt the user to get searching in the box up there for a resource so that they could then see everything around it. And our design guidelines suggest that it should be kind of short and snappy, and also, as is not very often the thing at IBM, should kind of be a little light-hearted. And so as a new team, we really weren't sure how formal we should go or how informal we should go. So we used a post-itting method. So you can see at the top here, we've got the super formal things like, right, let's get started, very to the point. And then all the way down here at the bottom was my silly suggestion, which is, hey, good looking. And then moving on with the next sentence. So this was a group activity. There were 3 of us, 1 researcher and 2 designers. And then at the very bottom, you can see our actual instructional sentence, we call it, is drafted word by word. So we had alternatives there, like search for a node or choose a resource, and we would have sorted through them until we came up with something we were happy with. So that's how we did it, and this is what we ended up with. And actually it's really pixelated, isn't it? It says, looking for a topology, search for a resource to get started. And that's because we wanted to make sure that we were linking the concept of topology, which is what people understand the product to be, with the concept of a resource. And it seems to have gone down really well with users, so that's good. Before I start to round up, I also wanted to show that not all outcomes of content-driven design are actually written. So in the warm-up activity, you all had a go at playing with language, which is great. We can get really figurative with analogy and metaphor. Another way that we can get ourselves doing that is through Lego Serious Play. Who's come across Lego Serious Play? A few people. Okay. I really recommend you go and look it up. It's amazing. They will charge you a fortune, Lego, to actually train as a serious play person, but just, pick it up on the internet. It's great. So we asked our Netcool developers to explain the core of their product using a maximum of 10 bricks. And so here there's actually 3 different developers' responses. And you can't really tell from this picture, but the conversations were really figurative. We were kind of talking about filtering, protecting, stopping oncoming waves and whirlpools. And you can imagine that as a visual designer, that's a great resource of kind of different images that you can go and look at. So this is my lovely colleague Joseph's kind of iterations. It's very tidy though. I don't think it can be the actual original document. So this icon on the left-hand side is kind of very representative of what the traditional Netcool logo was. And what we were really pleased about was that actually the developers all voted for the new top right to replace it, which we didn't really think would happen. So we thought that was great. That was a win. And the amazing thing about that approach was that there were no words written down, even though it was a content-based approach to the problem. So we've looked at three examples. I'm going to try and summarize a little before I sign off. So there are a key number of benefits to using content-driven design. Self-education is one of the best ones. So in a recent project, we needed to actually absorb some long technical documentation into a UI, and our UI was very minimalist, so we needed to cut it down. And that meant we had to learn from developers through talking to them what we could cut out and what we couldn't. And then in kind of vice versa, the developers learned from us how to inject a bit of personality when they write stuff. Which brings me perfectly on to my next point, and that's sustainability. Because what you can do when you start doing content-driven design is think about how you will encourage and maintain the same levels of quality in the future. So with that example, we then set up GitHub issue templates that kind of hinted and gave tips as somebody went through the original process of writing their content. And so now anyone in the team can do content writing, which is great. Words encourage us to be figurative. We've seen that multiple times today. We don't just have to rely on drawing to explain concepts. And when you do your drawing with words, you get metaphor and analogy, which is a whole wealth of kind of imagery-based resource to use. You're always immediately ready to usability test. I cannot stress the importance of the fact that if you can design your copy as like the first stage of design, you can have it prototyped in HTML in minutes. And then you can have that in front of a user, which is quite literally one of the best assets we could have. And above all, if you use the Oscar model, it's naturally user-centered because you think of the user outcome first. So, in the examples I've shared today, we've also used several activities. So you guys started off first with the analogy cards, which are great fun. They're just a selection of images and you can use them in lots of different ways. We looked at an example of writing some writing guidelines. We have looked at Oscar, we've looked at post-itting words, and we've looked at using Lego Serious Play. So hopefully these are some good ideas that you guys can all go and use yourselves. I think we've got time for one very quick activity. And this one you can do on your own, because I know everyone hates talking to other people. So think for me, and if you have pen and paper, write it down. 3 words you'd like to describe yourself as. It should take you like 10 seconds. Everyone got 3 words? Yeah, well, we're moving on anyway. Write down the opposite of each of those words. So in this example, we said approachable. I want to be approachable. And then the opposite word was inaccessible. So has everyone got at least 1 pair of opposite words? And then you can, if you want, you can go and elaborate a little bit. And this is literally your first content guideline for you as a person. The content that you produce and put out every day, if you can check yourself against what you've just written now, you should be on track to have a really consistent brand message, which is always important. Anyone want to share anything? No, I thought I'd ask anyway. So to finish off, I'm also going to direct you to some other great activities, because I think literally the best thing people can do is give you activities to do. And I will just try and talk through these very quickly so that you have a bit of an idea of context. And of course, this is recorded, so you can always go back. So opportunity algorithms are something we're using a lot at the moment in a very new project at work. It's all about surveying desired outcome statements. So this is, think of 100 things that your user might possibly want to do in your experience, and you can get them graded in a survey by a whole bunch of users. Really good way of kind of directing product development. Journey maps. I'm sure you guys have come across journey maps. It's like the most basic design thinking tool. But what you can do is then highlight with like a sticker or a dot where the bits of information that people are picking up are. And then you can see which ones they've had to go on a detour to get to, which ones have been right there in the experience, and try and bring them all together so that they're a little more aligned. Empathy maps don't just have to be about a persona or a user. You can empathy map your brand. So I always find my favourite question when I'm doing an empathy map is, if they walked into Starbucks, what coffee do they usually order? And I think that can really inject some personality, you know, especially if we're talking about designing chatbots and things like that. Story writing, there's some great stuff out there on story writing theories, so the hero's journey, all that kind of stuff. You can really use that to accelerate your user along their experience. And sometimes it's nice to kind of write a before and after. What would their experience be like in terms of negatives without your product? What would it be like with your product? If you really dramatize the positives and the negatives, then you've basically got your next pitch kind of already written, which is nice. And finally, inventories. So this is a horrible job, but it's well worth doing. If you go and look at your experience, note down every piece of terminology you use, and especially note where you've got two different terms for the same concept, and then try and standardize across that. So yeah, like I say, it's a nasty thing to have to do, but it's worth doing. And finally, card sorting, which is more of a research activity. If you have your users list everything they might ever want to do with your product or your experience, and then naturally sort them into groups. It's a great way of assessing whether your information architecture is right or whether it's not. So, bit of an information dump for you there. So thank you all so much for listening and for indulging me with the silly activities. I was going to make you all stand up and get post-its out, and then I thought, oh, 25 minutes, it's a bit tight. So I probably won't do questions now, but do come and find me in the break if you've got questions, and that's my email address. So thanks.